Well, welcome back. It's just the two of us today. It seems to harder these days to get everybody in the same room because our schedules are becoming crazy busy. But we're back. I think the last time, Andrew, wasn't it before Dynamics Minds? I think that we were on air last, so it's a fair wee while ago.
Yeah, it was before the conference, before my birthday. Anna planned a wild multi-country birthday tour around Europe, and so I want to peg it at like it was probably around mid-May, like May 19th or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, a lot has changed. You went on a big award at the at Dynamics Minds, I see.
I did. That was that was lovely. It was I think the title of the award was Advocate for High Quality Standards or something like that. It was really lovely to be chosen for that. I'm not a guy who lends. I don't think that my work always lends itself very well to awards. A lot of times it happens sort of behind the scenes or in a place that there isn't an award category for. Yeah. So it was lovely. Yeah,
it was good. Once again, it was a fantastic event. It was interesting seeing so many of the community there. Big event. But I don't know, there's a bit of momentum that's been building, I suppose, over the last couple of weeks. And my observations online around almost like camps being drawn up on people's, where they're staking out their territory in regards to AI.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about this as well. And in my mental model here, I really see that there's three camps, and maybe through this conversation we'll come up with more. But real quick summary of my thinking on this is that one, there are the optimists. You and I think probably everyone who joins us on the show, we are definitely in that optimist camp. The optimists are we very much believe, I think, that AI is the future, that AI, when done in a trustworthy and responsible way, is a force for good and for positive change. I don't think any of us would say that AI is perfect, or that individual vendors like Microsoft or others, Apple has been far from perfect in how they've done the AI. They're ridiculously bad, but we're not apologists, I don't think, but I think we're overall pretty optimistic about it. The second camp that I see, and we can explore all of these, is that there's the deniers, right? These are folks who I think that their general attitude is to stick their fingers in their ear and sort of say la 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 and hope that it goes away. They're the folks that say ridiculous things like this is the golden age of business applications, which is one of the craziest things I've heard someone say in a long time. And I think that those folks are really, they look at AI and they look at other technologies, other edge technologies like some of the more advanced data platform technologies, and they say this is a way to shore up my use or my business around old technology, right?
Yeah.
And then the third camp, and I don't have a name for this, maybe you can, maybe we'll come up with something here. These are the folks who are they just seem angry about it. They seem mad that, this comes in different forms. You get, I think, a lot of folks that some of the things that I hear, right, are that they're mad that Microsoft is going in a new direction, or they're mad that Microsoft is changing technology that they like. One of the strangest examples of this is someone who he wrote an article and published it, I think, on LinkedIn recently or on his blog, that one of his criticisms was if you go to the Microsoft 365 homepage now, which you can get to at microsoft.cloud, that they got rid of the waffle and they've now turned it into a link that says apps.
Yeah.
As if the visual representation of the button you have to click somehow imposes a burden on you. So these folks in the the angry camp. They're just mad about everything, and they I find them very tiresome.
And particularly change, right? I mean, changes, like how many things has changed across, like I started on my, my first operating system was DOS.
Right.
If I got upset every time Microsoft changed something, when they brought out Windows, when they brought out Windows 95, etc., click, 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 click all the way through, mate, I'd never get any sleep. I'd lose my hair. And yet change is a constant. I mean, for me, it's like more opportunity. I don't know. Every time I see change, I'm like, hey, people are going to need help with this change. I can help.
Maybe I've said on this, maybe I've said on the show before, but my earliest I would say that the earliest productive thing that I did on a computer, other than just screwing around, right, was I wrote a program, an inventory control program that was stored on a 5.25-inch floppy disk, the kind that actually was floppy, and it ran on a 286 DOS PC. And the purpose of this thing was, get this, the inventory that we were controlling were the supply of new, fresh notebooks, pencils, erasers, etc. at my school, that were sold to kids to students at my school. That was my first experience, right?
Do you know that you have parallels with Bill Gates there? Because at his school, his first kind of big computer project that he did at school was something around managing the class rosters for his school.
Was it really? Yeah. That's why.
He built a solution because it was taking his teachers forever to try and work out, the roster for which classes should be where and whatnot. And he created a program that did it back in the day.
That's interesting, because one of my very first jobs, my first job was in like infrastructure, networking, pulling wires, cables, building servers out of parts. But I think it was my second job. One of my very first jobs was I worked for a county board of education, and this was before you had COTS, commercial off-the-shelf ed tech software to manage schools. And I built what today we would call it a web portal. Actually, that sort of dates me. Today we wouldn't call it a web portal, but for probably most of the last several decades, we would have called it a web portal, to basically manage the operations of a school, or of a school district. So that's really that's interesting. Really interesting.
One thing happened the week where we went to Dynamics Minds, and that was Build was on that week. And, Microsoft announced pair programming agents, right? Part of GitHub. And it's kind of one of the goals I've set myself is to become a expert vibe coder. And the reason I say that is I
almost just spit my coffee all over my monitor. I don't know.
All coders will freak out, right? But the thing is, the way I see things going, it's only a matter of time before, if Microsoft's claiming right now 20 to 30% of all their code is AI written, that's only going to excel. That number isn't going backwards. That's only going to continue to climb for the organization. And I did a thought experiment while I was flying. One flight I was on was 17 hours long, so I had some time to contemplate.
Was that after my birthday party, Mark?
No, it was. I couldn't do anything after your birthday party.
Mark learned a very valuable lesson. Do not take a long haul flight from Europe to anywhere in the Pacific. If it's that long, you should not do it after your friend's birthday party. Yes. That is a bad idea.
Thank goodness my wife was with me to get me where I needed to get.
Fortunately unfortunately for her.
Yeah, yes. Fortunately for me. That aside, is that I did this big thought experiment on the way there with AI around, first of all, I've got a library of over 300 business books and technical books in the Kindle format. And I've been collecting these over years of reading. And there's often times an idea comes to my mind from I know something I've read over time, and I want to just drill back into that little piece. But because AI doesn't have access to fully published books, and a lot of that's not in the public domain, I want to interrogate with AI this library of 300 books. And so I started this process of going, okay, how... So the thought experiment was this. Listen, I said, I've got access to Azure and I've got credit there. I've got GitHub Copilot, a commercial version of it. So I got my GitHub. I've got VS Code on my desktop. I can provide you all the credentials to all these things. Watch people freak out when they hear me say that, to the AI. What I would like to do is create using RAG across these books. I want it vectorized, chunked, etc., so that I can, at speed, make sure that I am ingesting all that data, and we need it in a format that is consumable. And so, we need to think about memory and when I purchased, all the meta kind of data around it as well. How would we go about doing it? And of course it said, well, we could do it this way, blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, could you write me the code to ingest these books, and what storage would we put it in Azure? And so as I built out, and this was over hours chatting away, as I built a multi-agent system, I didn't build it, but I built the architecture of it. And this would allow me to, I had one agent that was always monitoring security and always monitoring Microsoft for update in its security posture with its software and technology. And it would then proactively say, hey, I'm going to take you, let's say we had an encryption level of X and Y came out. It would say, okay, in the next 48 hours, we're going to go to the Y and we're going to, bring it all up to speed. And I had another agent that was monitoring my spend. So always spend optimization, storage optimization, tech optimization, code optimization going on. And of course, it didn't then stop at books. I was like, well, I've been collecting all my data for the last 15 to 20 odd years. Can we ingest all that too, clean it up, understand? I'll give you all my medical records, all my financial data, blah, 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 blah. And so as I built this entire system out, I obviously was creating kind of like a second brain for me. And then I created a redundancy protocol on it, which was an offline version of the LLM. I got it to spec the hardware, about $8,000 for the hardware, at a serverless architecture that would maintain its connections with online until if something got pulled, it would have its backups running, and I could run the entire thing without internet access, but the full LLM running localized. It was a pretty high-spec machine, something like, it was maybe 8 terabyte of storage. It had something like 300 meg of RAM. It was a grunty box. But what I realized is that I was architecting a piece of software.
That's a phrase. It was a grunty box.
Yeah.
That is...
Exactly. But
I wish Chris Huntingford were here too for a hot take on that.
The thing is, how would I ever spec that or get someone else to do it if it wasn't just a hobby project that I could do on my own time for myself? But I couldn't write that code. But of course, what I've already realized, I've been able to write pages and pages of code assisted with, I've been using 2 different agents for this. One is Rue, which is a plugin that you can get for VS Code, and the other one is GitHub Copilot. And it's phenomenal what they can do, and the error correction and this whole agent tasking. And, Microsoft only announced all those new features at Build. But where's that going to be in 1 year, 2 years' time? The advances in that space.
Yeah. I think I want to come back. I think we should come back to Build, and I think we should come back to our 3 camps as well. But I do want to explore this story a little bit that you've told. First of all, I love it. I think it's so cool. But I think that when when this term vibe coding really kind of entered the mainstream, or at least the tech mainstream. First of all, it was not well understood.
Yeah.
And I think it immediately got a bad, I think, really sort of a bad play with, it became a meme, right?
Yeah.
But my perspective on whether you call it vibe coding, or, whether you're talking about a specific technology like GitHub Copilot, or whether you're talking about, some of the, some of the low code technologies like the plan designer in Power Platform now. So I'm broadly thinking of this entire genre of capabilities that allow one to build applications, and we'll define that broadly, agents, copilots, whatever it is, that allow people to build applications very quickly with the assistance of AI. It reminds me of the transition that was made in web development, right? So I love Squarespace, right? Yeah. Squarespace is a great product. When I've had blogs, I at this point I publish my newsletter on LinkedIn because it's just easier. But when I've had blogs, I've built them in Squarespace. I just think it's a great tool. But I remember, if I go back 20 some years, 23, 24 years ago, right? And I remember sitting there writing code for a website in Notepad, right? On this was in that weird brief period of my life between being a Mac user. Like most of my life I've been a Mac user, but for a little while I was anyway. So I would write the code by hand for a website in Notepad. And I remember there was an app that came out. What was it? It might have, I want to say it was Microsoft Publisher, but it could have been something. Microsoft may have had a different name for it.
Page. They had a
Front Page it was. And I remember when Front Page came out, and I thought it was dumb because, by the way, it produced horrible, like it just was not good, right? Yeah. And I thought it was really dumb. And I also thought, and people I knew, I think anyone would have agreed with me, right? That it was lame. It was, for people who don't know what they're doing, right? And then Dreamweaver. Do you remember Macromedia? Oh, Dreamweaver?
Yeah. Remember it was first released before Adobe purchased it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Macromedia was cool back then.
The Macromedia before Adobe purchased it, the two that I remember just loving were Dreamweaver and Fireworks.
Yeah, they were ahead of their time. They were amazing bits of tech that just worked.
They were amazing, and I remember in Fireworks you could build a graphic, right? Yeah. And if you wanted that bitmap to have code sitting, to have be somehow interactive, clickable links, whatever in the bitmap, Fireworks would generate that code for you, and you could then just drop it into Dreamweaver. Mm-hmm. But Dreamweaver allowed you to write to write your markup for your web page, right? And as you went along, you would see what a visual representation of what you were writing. And I remember thinking at the time, now that's interesting. I fail to see how that is somehow worse or more lame than writing it in Notepad. It helps me go faster.
Yeah.
It's not as many years later, our friend Keith Watling would call Canvas apps clicky, clicky, draggy, droppy. It's not that. It's not Front Page, right? So I started using Dreamweaver. And, then I took a many years break from doing any, I just focused on other things, right? From doing anything like this at all. But fast forward to today's era, and you don't hear people talking about how Squarespace is stupid, right? Or Squarespace. In fact, there's an entire community of professionals who design websites in Squarespace and are paid for this, right? So I overlay that. I think that that's an interesting sort of parallel to vibe coding, again, whatever you want to call it, right? Vibe coding is right now in the front page Dreamweaver era, where I think I see a lot of developers talking about how stupid it is and about how it's low quality and it's whatever it is, and they want to go back to Notepad. But the answer I find in technology is very rarely that we need to go back to the way we used to do it. It's that we need to go forward to doing the new thing in a better way.
Yeah. I used to do everything in WordPress, right? Because I love to be able to control the plugins and stuff. And then, I switched probably 3 years ago to Squarespace as well, because I'm like, I just want to actually get something published out there. I don't want to waste my time dicking around with, did I update the plugins, or was that plugin out of date, or whatever had changed that stopped my form working on the web. I don't want to care about that. I just want a site up that works. And I think we're still on that bridge line of people that know the old way. And like, I've used a designer recently and they're like, why aren't we doing this in WordPress? Because they like that old way and they haven't moved forward with, and for them, they just see the new technology platforms restrictive. I can't do what I used to do. But they actually do everything so much faster, quicker, smarter, better. And of course, some people would say, well, it's not really better because you don't have the control. But I don't need the control. It gets the page out there. It gets me engaged with my audience. That's what I needed.
I have this debate, a similar debate with people all the time, and have for many years. And I'll tell you about a chat that I had with our friend Will. But first, the debate. This is the age old debate between I'm not talking about normal sort of average consumers from a technical perspective. I'm talking about people who kind of know, who at least kind of know what's happening, right? And it's the debate about, are you a Mac user or are you a Windows? Or I'm not going to say Windows because, you could be a Linux user as well. Like, are you a Mac user? Are you a Mac or are you a PC, right? One of my very, very best friends, John. John is a physician at the University of Virginia. We've known each other for many years. John, to this day, he says to me that, well, he's a PC user because he wants to be able to install his own RAM. Like, he wants to be able to do, and I'm like,
who's got time
bro,
for that?
first of all, you're a pediatric allergist. Like, what possibly are you doing that requires you to be able to install your own chips inside of your desktop PC? But, more broadly, and this will get me to the chat that I had with Will, right? I am and listen, I think, anyone who knows me, anyone who listens to this show knows that I love Microsoft. I love Microsoft's technology. But when it comes to the devices that I use, I have a MacBook, I have an iPhone, and I have an iPad. And I love them because they're just a lovely experience, right? And I don't think much. I don't think much about it, and they all work together. And this is an age-old debate. So Will and I we're talking a couple of weeks back, and Will was asking me about my use of AI, AI technologies. What is it that I use? And I told him he was really surprised to know that probably 90% of my use of AI is, sort of my daily use of AI happens through Copilot, right? Yeah. Now, I definitely gravitate. I almost never use the consumer, the personal version of Copilot. I use M365 Copilot that we have through Cloud Lighthouse, right? I like having my conversation history all in one place. I don't need to think like, oh, did I do that in the business version or the personal version?
You would not touch the personal version. It sucks.
Yeah. So Will ask me some questions because I think it's pretty well documented that a Copilot often does not provide the quality of answers and responses that ChatGPT does, for example.
Yeah.
But my case is that, one, Copilot is usually good enough.
Yeah.
Right? Two, Copilot is getting a ton of investment and has, from
Totally.
Microsoft. I'm a big believer in the principle of following the money,
100%.
right? Like, look at where the Microsofts of the world are investing. Even if it's like really not all that great when it first comes out, it will be, right?
Yeah.
And three, it's just less mental load for me to sit and think, one, well, which one should I use to do this fairly low level task?
Yeah.
And then also, which one did I use a week ago to do it? Because now I want to go back and access that conversation or that thing that it produced. And I think now that my patience, I've been very, very patient with Copilot. I feel like my patience is paying off, right?
Yeah.
Around the time of build, this agent, this Copilot agent called Researcher, rolled out in full. So we all have that now. If you have a license, a license for M365 Copilot, go to Microsoft.cloud. You'll see under agents on the left, there's this thing called Researcher. That thing is phenomenal,
Isn't
right? It is. So I feel very vindicated by my decision to really just double down on Copilot, get through some of the bullshit, because now I feel like Microsoft is really on a roll.
Yeah. Meg brought up something really interesting at a few weeks ago. And it was actually a discussion she was having with Steve Mordew, of all things.
But you know what? I really like Steve Mordew. Like, I'm always so happy to see him. He's such a good guy.
Yeah. And it was the discussion around, which AI you used and stuff. And often you'll hear people bad mouth an AI that they don't use. Like, Copilot, useless. There's nowhere near as good as X, Y, or Z, out there. And my wife, she's married to me, so she has a similar sense of humor. She was like, well, it's like when you build a relationship with somebody, kind of, how to communicate, right? The longer you have a relationship, their style, their technique, and that type of thing. And what you're doing is having a one-night stand with Copilot and saying, doesn't get me, doesn't understand me. Useless, And one you've invested a long relationship in, one you've flirted with on the side and made a judgment call, And I was like, it's an interesting metaphor to illustrate the more, and like what you're seeing there yourself, the more you invest in the tool, the more you become fluent in it and can get what you need from that kind of those experiments that you run with it. It's interesting.
Yeah. I think that's true. Though I'm curious, and I have my answer, but I'm going to ask you first. What is an AI tool that you have used recently that, or over the last 6 months or so, that you've been particularly disappointed with?
I can answer that from today.
From today. Okay. What is an AI tool that you've used today that you've been particularly disappointed with?
So one of the things that Copilot doesn't have is a voice experience at the moment. In other words, I can have a conversation on audio only, no keyboard input. And so I went out to my greenhouse to do something. And of course, I've got gloves on while I'm working. So I just hit the audio version so I can have a conversation backwards and forwards. And I was thinking about something as in that I'd been working on at my computer, which is I needed to raise a support ticket for this particular website. And I said, can you find the exact URL for me to raise a ticket? And it said, oh yeah, go to blah, blah, blah.com/support, and you'll find there all the options that you have available. And I said, no, I've been there. I don't want to hunt and find. They've hidden their phone number. They've hidden their ability to find chat or anything. They've always 5,000 knowledge base articles that you need to get through before you can raise a ticket to support. And it was like, okay, I'll give you the exact URL. Here's the URL, blah, blah, blah.com/support/ask your question. And I'm like, what? Ask your question? No, when you get there, you'll be able to see the options that you have. I'm like, you just pointed me to the same fucking place I just was. And I know it's not there. You're making it up. And so that was Copilot that wasn't Copilot, that was ChatGPT, the latest build on audio. And it is so fluffy around, you might find it uses this language. And I grew up, my first major career was in the medical industry. And in the medical industry, when we had to interpret standards, there were keywords that you look for in a standards. The keyword was may. This environment may have the setting, which gave you some room to move. Or it said should. You knew if it said should, that it absolutely, there was no deviation. If it said the air temperature in an operating theater at the wound site needed to be, 23 degrees Celsius, it would have must, right? And you would look for these words because they were telltales of whether you had any scope of movement. And what I've noticed in a lot of the audio-based chat, they give themselves lots of scope for movement. They use fluffy language. They don't commit to an exact. And I'm like, no, I'm wanting you to save me time, not assume something should be where it should be.
Mark, maybe that, as you say that, I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe the audio capability are trained by the British, right, who are famous for, it may, when an English person says that something may be, what they mean is you will do this, right? Yeah. This is, in British English, may means should or will, right? And for the rest of us, trying to interpret that is just, that was one of the most difficult things about living and working in the UK, was trying to understand what exactly you're telling me here. How important is the thing that you are downplaying right now?
Back to the original thing, just before we go though, you came up with opportunistic, then there's the angry, and then there's what was the other one? You called it something starting with D, the Optimists,
Deniers,
yeah.
And we need a word. We need a word for
angry pricks.
Yeah.
Right. Let's just call them what they are. Right.
If we can get a couple of the others.
Yeah.
Next time we have a couple of the others on the show, I think we should do a show where we explore those three attitudes and approaches, and we really stick with it through the episode. I will say my big disappointment in AI recently has been the Meta AI built into WhatsApp, because I think that Meta has, and still has, an opportunity, because WhatsApp is on so billions of phones, right? Yeah. Meta has an opportunity to pipe its AI capabilities into WhatsApp from a user experience perspective. But I have just found that it absolutely falls flat. It was a major disappointment.
It just made a $14 billion AI purchase this week. One of the biggest. I think it's the biggest purchase Meta has ever made, because it feels behind in the AI race. Yeah. So a massive investment this week. And it's interesting because those three lenses, I actually can talk about those three from what's actually happened across all the LLMs in the market in the last week, and the predictions from Google, who are predicting that superintelligence is not going to come to just after 2030, to Dario Amodei saying that it's here in 2026, and Sam Altman's right with him that it's here. And people like, Apple just came out this last week saying, with a paper showing it's dumb, and then OpenAI bought out a model called O3 Pro, and all the tests that Apple had run to say it didn't reason, it just smashed them one after the other, destroyed it.
This Apple white paper, and we need to come back to that Apple white paper when we talk about the three camps, because one of the things that cracked me up, right, were the angry camp jumped on, and actually the deniers, the denialists as well. These folks jumped on this Apple white paper as proof for, like, see, I told you, this is stupid. Everything is gonna go back to the way it was, and it just, again, I find it tiresome. But I know we need to run,
that's
so
another show.
Come back.
We're talking to you, Andrew. Ciao, ciao.
See you, Mark.